So the first provocation is that landscape approaches are old wine in new bottles. Another faddish development concept, too complicated or complex to implement. So would anybody from the panel, including you, Emily, the panelists online, and indeed Cora and James, like to jump in with a reaction to that statement? Cora, please.
Yeah, thank you. I love this statement because actually I do love old wine, and I also like fancy new bottles. An approach that has been in existence for a few hundred of years, has proven to be good, needs to be revamped and contextualized. And I think as compared to the past, the local conditions have improved a lot. In most countries, there is decentralization, there is a great empowerment, and there are educated landscape actors. So the more that local development proceeds, the more likely that landscape approaches were valid, are valid, and will be valid even more. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So the wine will be on you next time we meet in person. I think there was another hand up. Was that George or James? Delia, why don't you go for it?
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I think I'd agree with Cora. I mean, the reason why it's bottled in a different way because nobody learns from it, and it's faddish because again, it has been there, but nobody really was very serious about it. Thank you, and it's complicated for sure.
Anybody else from the panel? Final reflection on, can I open it up to the participants? Anybody here in the hall with us would like to react to that? Nope. Yeah. You're looking hesitant.
Well, what strikes me that a lot of the challenges that have been addressed by the various speakers today arise from the fact that these ILM approaches are always introduced from outside. Are there examples where they've actually come out of the communities engaged themselves, who have then pulled in the expertise they need? And does that provide fewer challenges that way?
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to continue on the point that Cora and Delia were raising now, in that it's not really a problem that these are concepts that have been developed over time, because in a certain way, all of these processes that are involved in integrated landscape management are ongoing. And what we're trying to do in this work is make people more conscious of these processes and how they interact, so that we can have more intentional influence over them, rather than having it just be trial by error or letting things work out on their own, but trying to have some intention in what's changing on our landscape and having some attempt at trying to influence the change.
Thank you, Peter. George, online?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, to me, I think there are new and innovative aspects to the landscape approaches compared to the integrated rural development and national resource management. I mean, issues of social inclusion, participation, co-creation, multi-stakeholder planning, participatory adaptive governance. I mean, these are sort of concepts which have emerged and being integrated into the landscape approaches that I do think is distinct. The practice, however, from what I'm seeing, it is really rebranding the old. And I think a lot of development stakeholders are opportunistic, because by branding it as landscape approaches, they can get funding, but often lack the understanding and capacity, as Delia also pointed out, to implement them effectively. So a lot of the approaches are not multi-sectoral in nature, or do not really involve genuine multi-stakeholder planning processes, and have completely obscure sequencing. So I think there's a lot wrong with how many such projects are being implemented. And again, I think that's a space where we should insert ourselves more aggressively.
Great, thanks, George. We have a comment from Stephen Laurie. Interventions can be understood as resources offered to land users with the intention of solving problems believed relevant to land users. At the end of the day, interventions can be considered successful only if land users consider them useful to solving those problems and adopt them accordingly. That said, land users may find interventions useful in ways not anticipated by project planners, but very often they don't find them useful at all, hence the poor uptake of donor, etc. interventions. Cora has also raised her hand for another comment. Sorry, I'm sorry, Emily, yes.
So just to respond to the comment here in the room, I mean, I would agree with what the other panelists have said, and that the social and the practical uptake has changed. There is a lot more capacity on the ground for some of these development concepts that have been around for a very long time. So we are seeing a lot more peers to work with in the field. But why is it still so complicated and difficult to implement and it still looks the same? It's because the structures and institutions haven't changed. I mean, bureaucracies are still institutionalized into silos, and multi-stakeholder approaches have to work across those silos. There are no budgets to do that without external donor funding. So that's why it always does look like the outside coming in to grease the wheels and make things move, because the structures still don't allow for it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Hold on, Cora, we'll get to you.
A short one, Patrick Worms here. The issues that you identified, George, remind me of the issues that are also affecting the concept of agroecology. The more I think about it, the more I wonder if the two approaches, the landscape approach and the ecological approach, are not largely synonymous to one another. And I'd love for somebody who knows both well to comment on that. Okay. Cora, did you have a comment?
Several. The speaker who's just speaking, agroecology, I think it's complementary, maybe not similar, but the two could go very well hand in hand. But I want to respond to the speaker before, the lady whose name I don't know. I think we've reached the end of what we call, the end of what we call good governance. Good governance has been promoted for decades now, and very much translated in the administrative sense, procedural sense. But I think the whole concept of borders and boundaries has been turned upside down. All conflicts, almost all conflicts in this world are about border disputes. So I think we need to move from classical administrations and jurisdictions to much more of a landscape thinking in governance and in management. That's, I think, the spatialization or the spatiality that is bitterly needed. That's quite novel, and I think your communities of place, something that was said this morning, is super relevant to this. In addition, responding to governments or donors who are not able to anticipate to this trend. If I look at the Dutch government, that's hilarious. Yes, they are in for an experiment. They are so in for financing landscape programs, but their administrative system does not allow because landscape action doesn't fit in any of the existing budget lines, which is water, climate, food, and sexual, reproductive, whatever. And second, the computer system is not able to handle the complexity of landscape programs. I find that so hilarious, really. Thank you.
Okay. Peter Menang, are you here? No, there you go.
Thanks. I think very interesting discussion. I think one of the things that I haven't heard in the whole afternoon is time. The way we interpret and conceptualize landscapes and landscape approaches is that there is a rigid time frame to it. When you look at the table that Delia put forward, I mean, the average time frame was 5 years. Mm-hmm. That's not how it happens. Yeah. It will never happen that way. We need to think about landscapes as processes that go over time. Trust is a key variable. You don't build trust in 2-3 years. That doesn't happen. If you look at a lot of the landscape approaches, the few that have been really successful, it takes time. It does take time. Mm. The second thing that I think we need to be able to look at, and I think a lot of the speakers have alluded to in what they said, is, and even in the last discussion, let's not dream that donor funding is ever going to make landscape successful. It will never happen. we only have two avenues to make that happen. To make sure that governments as institutions, we are making business cases for landscapes to be able to build and work on their own. If we cannot bring business cases and make landscapes viable from a business perspective, what we will do is, as Delia was alluding to, or I mean, as where landscapes have been largely successful from the conservation perspective. So you get green landscapes with poor people that are poor, what I call green poverty, right? If we don't have the business case, forget it. The second alternative we have is to convince government that there is a business case for investing in the landscape approach, so that the minimum that government can put in from a developing country perspective can help that move forward. And that is where I think the marriage between what Cora was talking about in terms of how do you link the jurisdictional approaches and the planning approaches to coincide with the landscape planning approaches is extremely important. If landscapes aren't planned, development visions of the governments and the aspirations of the time that are linked to the decisions and decisions that are linked to money, sorry. So if there is any one thing that we could do to bring to this debate, I appreciate the stakeholder, multi-stakeholder approaches, I appreciate all of that, but these two things don't happen. We will do nice projects, we will finish them, and we won't change anything.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'm going to take one more comment from James Reed on this provocation, and then we'll move on to the second one. So quickly, James.
Hi, Kim. Sorry, I dropped off the call, so I apologise if I'm repeating what's already been said. But I was asked this question back in 2014, and the simple answer, I think the reason I was asked then is because there was a paper that just came out from Kent Redford about fads in conservation. And the fact is, landscape approaches will be a fad. There's no doubt, because all of these concepts ultimately end that way. But I think the important thing is to acknowledge that the move towards integration is necessary, because we know from the problems we're still facing from sectorial approaches, the integration is necessary. So it's important that we retain the lessons learned from integrated landscape approaches for whatever the next fad might be. And the only person I heard was Peter, and I completely agree that with regards to the time constraint. I mean, there's been studies showing that even building capacity takes 20 years. So these short-term project models are obviously insufficient. So how we institutionalize landscape approaches is obviously crucial.
Okay, thank you. And thanks so much for all of the inputs and thoughts around that first provocation.